And it's even way more complex because it's not just about morality and not just about ethics, but you also have a little thing called the law. So, what might be a legal way for you to handle the situation in the United States, for example, might not be a legal way for me to handle it over here in the Netherlands. So that's an additional layer. I'm not sure if it's a layer on top of ethics or if it's more like a pillar next to ethics. But either way, it's another framework that is really important to take into account
Hmm.
to when making an appropriate decision for that specific situation. Because very extreme example, but in that specific situation where a guy is harassing a woman and the guy is stronger, and then you're thinking about yourself and you're like, yeah, there's no way, in a with hand-to-hand combat, there's no way I'm gonna win this.
Mm.
Okay, but how about grabbing a rock, and throwing it against his head, something like that, right? Okay,
Right.
you're saving the woman, but you're killing the guy. Is that legal? Right? You're not asking an ethical question anymore, because there is something to be said for saving a good and removing a bad factor. Let's just put it like that on the table. So that's the ethical stamp. That's the ethical discussion that you could have, right?
Right.
Does saving a good person um, um, weigh heavier than hurting a bad person? But the law doesn't care about that, because I think that if you play this specific situation exactly out here in Netherlands, I think you will go to prison, and that's a problem. Even though you can make the argument that it might be ethical, maybe if that's the conclusion that you're going to, you're still going to prison. So did you make a bad choice then?
Right. Right. So there are, yes. So there are all kinds of mitigating factors. If you look at things like abortion laws in the United States or self-defense laws, like what you're describing, um, there are a lot of there are a lot of see, this is where the law and morality diverge. There's not just these two areas. There are a lot of areas. I'm just saying these are examples of where the law and morality can diverge. Some people will, their morality will say, like, no matter what, this is a bad thing to do. That's deontological. It's saying here's the set of rules, and we cannot violate these
It's
rules.
black or white. You
And
either follow the rules or you
black,
break them.
right? And the
Mm-hmm.
law tends to be, well, the law is a pretty good example of deontology, right? Um, you all of the moral considerations are taken into account for you beforehand, and then it's codified into law. And so, whether those are your elected officials or depending on the kind of governance that you live under, the people who are making the laws, they're the ones who are making the moral considerations, and then they say, okay, now we've made the choice, the decision. Now everybody has to adhere to these rules. Okay, there are some situations that will arise where the codified law is morally wrong. What do you do? It depends on the situation, but like if you look at like the United States history with like African American people, there were a lot of laws in place at a certain time in our history that made it illegal for black people to participate as full citizens in the United States, codified into law. It's part of the law. So it's literally illegal to treat them as full people. So this is an example of where the law is a very specific way and people have strong feelings about it being wrong morally. Um, there's ways you can address it, like we did in this country, where in the United States, where you go through the processes of changing those laws so that they reflect more accurately the morality of the situation. It's never going to be perfect, but there's ways to engage to change things. But you're absolutely right. You have to take into consideration certain elements, and this is what I was saying earlier. We have this kind of like wrong assumption that life must be just. Sometimes, in order to pursue what is morally correct or morally good, in fact, often, you have to suffer some kind of injustice.
Can you give an example of that, of what you mean by that?
So I can give you a very, very famous example of this.
Okay.
Jesus Christ. So if you look at, the story of salvation, the story of Jesus, what he's doing when he dies on the cross, he is dying to save humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But look at what he had to go through in order to do that moral good, in order to do that thing that is like, that was his purpose and his value, his meaning, his purpose, his goal was to
sacrifice everything.
Thing.
Yeah.
Right. It was to accomplish this thing that was an ultimate moral good.
Mm-hmm.
But look at what it costed him. Terrible injustice.
Yeah.
So the reason I use that example, it's like the most extreme example I could think of, to highlight the fact that so many times people want praise or adoration or support for making good moral decisions. Okay, let's bring back virtue ethics. Why did you make that decision? Because if you made a good decision for the wrong reason, that's a vice. But if you made a good decision for the right reason and it affected you negatively, that could be a virtue. But if you made a good decision, it affected you negatively, but then everybody praised and worshipped you because of what you were willing to go through, and you made it because you love when people praise and worship you.
That's narcissism.
That's it. Right. So looking at a situation, it's very dependent. Like some of the stuff you were saying earlier, like what's the intention behind it? That's so important.
Right.
It weighs a lot when you're calculating morality, but there is more to it as well.
When we are talking about ethics, what do we mean exactly?
It's this interesting thing. It has to do with like a relationship with ourselves, but also with other people. Why did you do something? Well, I wanted to. Why didn't you do something? Because I didn't want to. With every choice and decision you make, you're thinking about it from the perspective of what kind of person will this decision make me? Sometimes, in order to pursue what is morally correct or morally good, in fact, often, you have to